Certainly didn't expect that high scoring game in the East semifinal. Hi there, it's Brett Hornby here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, and welcome back to another On the Road to the Grey Cup preview videos. We're a step closer to the 111th Grey Cup that will be played in Vancouver, British Columbia, just about 8.5 days from now. But for this upcoming weekend, obviously I'm going to be a little late Friday night to make my preview videos ahead of the games on Saturday. We're back on the east side of the bracket, now in the East Final, as it was the Toronto Argonauts. They successfully defeated the Ottawa RedBlacks 58-38. Yeah, 96 points. That's how many points were scored in that game. So they're off to Montreal to take on the Montreal Alouettes. And the winner of this game will obviously be off to the 111th Grey Cup in Vancouver. Before I break down this matchup, take a look at what happened last week and break down as the edge and ultimately give my prediction whiz bulb style. If you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I have my other social media links down in the description below. So let's get on to my notes and let's break down the East Final, and two opponents that they have met many times in the East Final over the years. Apparently, if you look back, you have to go back to the 1950s to have this scene set up, because Toronto, Montreal have hosted the games. Montreal usually like to play their playoff games in Olympic Stadium, but this is at Percival Molson Stadium. So you got the Montreal Alouettes hosting the Toronto Argonauts. This will be on Saturday, November the 9th, 2024. I mentioned Percival Molson Stadium, near where the McGill University is. There'll be a 1 p.m. Mountain kickoff, 3 p.m. Mountain or Eastern kickoff, depending on where you're watching this. And just do a little recap of last week's East semifinal. I was a little sick, so I didn't get to watch full of the game, but shocked to see that it was 58-38. Toronto Argonauts of the Ottawa RedBlacks. Don't take the under in that one. And actually Ottawa led 23-20 at halftime. So if you look at the numbers who stood up for each side, well, Chad Kelly, the quarterback, he almost had as perfect a game you can get. He was 18 for 20 in passing, threw for 358 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and he ran one in himself. So he threw for 4 and ran one in himself. Kadeem Carey actually was the leading rusher in this game. All the yards were mostly in the air in this game, spoiler alert. Kadeem Carey had 9 carries for 43 yards. And it was Mackie Polk for the Toronto Argonauts. He had himself a big day in receiving. In 4 catches, he had 150 yards and a touchdown, as well as former Stampeder in Devarius Daniels. He had 4 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. And then Jake Herslow also stood out. He had 4 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. And then Wynton McManus was big on defense. He had 10 defensive tackles, and he had 1 interception that led to a pick 6. I believe he was the one that lowered it. And then Benji Franklin, he also had 8 defensive tackles, 1 interception that also resulted in a pick 6. Both those pick 6s happened in the 4th quarter, which solidified the punch their ticket for the Toronto Argonauts to go to Montreal, but also why the score got even wider. And then for kicking, Liam Harahu, who had a perfect day. He was 3 for 3 field goals, with his 53 yards being his longest. Now, if you go on the Ottawa RedBlacks side of the ball, well, Drew Brown, he was in quarterback. He actually set a playoff record for those passing attempts in a playoff game. He was 46 for 61. So he had 61 pass attempts, and actually that was a record he broke that former Red Black at the time, Trevor Harris, had. And he had 476 yards passing. And threw 3 touchdowns. However, 2 interceptions in the 4th quarter, and Going back to Wynton McManus and Benji Franklin, those are the two interceptions that eventually led to pick sixes. So Drew Brown definitely took his lumps in the fourth quarter when Ottawa needed to be more aggressive to pull this one out. And then there's Braylon Addison. Actually was the leading rusher for the Ottawa RedBlacks. He only had 4 carries for 17 yards. She also added in Dustin Crum, the backup quarterback, short yardage quarterback was used. He had 1 yard and 4 carries, but he did run in 1 touchdown, just enough. But a couple of receivers for the Ottawa RedBlacks also had big games. Well, Khalil Pimpleton definitely had a big game. He had 13 catches for 123 yards. Then Braylon Addison, while wasn't as good on the ground running, he made up for it in the air as he had 10 catches for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Jalen Acklin also had 7 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. And then it was Monster Eric Hunter, who had 5 defensive tackles for the Ottawa RedBlacks. Lorenzo Malden, he had 2 defensive tackles, 1 sack, 1 fumble recovery. And then Lewis Ward, he was always steady. He was 4 for 4 in field goals, 42 yards being his longest. So that's just a quick rundown of the East semifinal that put up 96 points. Who would have saw that coming? So anyway, now to tee up this game between the Montreal Alouettes and the Toronto Argonauts. Well, the Montreal Alouettes, they earned the right to go host the East final. They had it locked up in August before Labor Day. They ultimately had the best record in the CFL as they were 12-5-1, first in the East Division, while the Toronto Argonauts, they were second in the East Division with a 10-8 record. And if you break down the records even more, the Montreal Alouettes, they were 6-3 at home, while they were 6-2 versus the East Division, while the Toronto Argonauts, they were 3-6 on the road and 3-5 versus the East Division. And obviously, the winner of this game will go to the 111th Grey Cup in Vancouver. That will be played on Sunday, November the 17th. Now the season series. Actually, these two teams played each other 3 times in the season series, and this actually kind of breaks a few trends, shall we say. Well, the first time these two teams met in the regular season, go all the way back to week 4. This happened on Friday, June the 28th, 2024. The game was in Toronto. Well, the Montreal Alouettes, they won that game 30-20. So Montreal drew first blood in this season series. Or the game that was in Toronto. I think I said Toronto. Montreal won 30-20. Then 2 weeks later, on week 6, this happened on Thursday, July the 11th. This game was in Montreal. So the first one was in Toronto. It was 30-20 for Montreal. Toronto got revenge as they won 37-18 in Montreal. And I think that was the first loss the Montreal Alouettes suffered of the season. So this season series needed a rubber match. Not ultimately, it wasn't for standings, but the winner of the season series was decided on week 17. This happened at the end of September on Saturday, November the 28th, 2024. And actually, this game was in Toronto, and the Toronto Argonauts actually won this game 37-31. So the season series went to the Toronto Argonauts for 2-1, where ultimately the road team won the first 2 games. Then the home team won the 3rd game. So maybe the records aren't going to really tell the whole story. But as I mentioned, these two teams played each other quite a bit in history, especially when they had Anthony McCalville, Montreal, and then you had Ricky Ray at times with the Toronto Argonauts. But the playoff history, well, these two teams actually played last year in the East Final. Excuse me, but it was hosted in Toronto, and they had a 16-2 record, keep in mind. But the Montreal Alouettes, they pulled off a big upset last year in the East Final, winning 38-17 on the road. And then the year before that, in 2022, it was the Toronto Argonauts that came back and beat Montreal. This game also was in Montreal, so the road team won. It was 34-27. So Toronto won that one, and they ultimately went on to win the Grey Cup. So then after 2022, the third time before that, you have to go back to 2012 in the East Final. Montreal hosted that game, but it was the Toronto Argonauts that won this one 27-20, as Toronto got to go home to win the Grey Cup in 2012. So looks like basically the winner of this game ultimately went on to win the Grey Cup. Last year, Montreal winning on the road. 2 years ago, Toronto winning at home, and then Toronto winning on the road in 2012. This film food for thought. So now this is the part of the video where I'll look at who's got the edge and break down who I think ultimately is going to win this game and go to Vancouver. Well, on the offense, I also look at CFL and kind of come to my conclusions. They say Montreal has the edge in running back and the offensive line. Because they got Walter Fletcher versus Gideon Carey, and Montreal has a little more of a running attack. However, the Toronto Argonauts, especially last week, they got the edge in quarterback and receivers with Chad Kelly, as controversial he is. I'm going to say right now, he has gotten back into the groove. It looked like the MLP form before the East Final last year after his 9-game suspension, finding chemistry with some receivers like Polk or Daniels. Who else could stand out? So basically, it's the running. Montreal's got the edge in running, while Toronto's got the edge in passing. Now on the defensive line, or on defense, I should say, the linebackers and defensive backs are going to be standing out. You know, they got Darnell Sankey, Antoine on the back end. Well, the defensive line, the front four, especially with Sean Amos leading the way. So the first level of defense would go to the Toronto Argonauts, while levels 2 and 3 would go to the Montreal Alouettes. And that was a big part of why the Montreal Alouettes was able to pull off the upset last year in the East Final to ruin Toronto's day. Now when it comes to special teams, well, this definitely favors the Toronto Argonauts on both ends. I think they have a more reliable kicker in Harlarahu over Zema and Matos. And the return game, Janiran Grant is established as one of the best returners in the CFL. So kicking and returning game will go to the Toronto Argonauts in this battle. And now I also like to look at the last playoff win, as already alluded to. Well, I'll just highlight the Montreal Alouettes, because Toronto, obviously, their last playoff win was last week's game, but the Montreal Alouettes, well, they are the defending Grey Cup champions, as they won the 110th Grey Cup in Hamilton by defeating the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 28-24 to cap off their Cinderella run. Well, they did host the East semifinal last year against Hamilton. I still say the bigger upset was winning the East Final than the Grey Cup last year, but Montreal definitely looked a little extra emotional, I shall say, when they won the Grey Cup, and no one even picked the Montreal Alouettes team to make the playoffs last year. So that was their last Grey Cup or playoff win, which is the Grey Cup. And then I also added in, now that we're closer to the Grey Cup, last Grey Cup appearance for either team. Well, either team doesn't really have that long of a drought, because Montreal obviously was in it last year and won it, so this would be their second straight year if they win this game. While the Toronto Argonauts, they were in the Grey Cup 2 years ago when they won the Grey Cup in Regina against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So either we're going to have Montreal going to the Grey Cup again for the second straight year, or the Toronto Argonauts making their second Grey Cup appearance in 3 years representing the East. So Neither team has a long-suffering drought or recent history. So now this is part of the video. This is where I'll put this team a win if. Well, so with Montreal being the home team, Montreal win if, let's say, if Cody Fajardo, if he finds his Grey Cup MLB form, this one has a better game than Chad Kelly. So if Cody Fajardo finds his magic again, and the challenge for the Montreal Alouettes, and I know this as a Calgary Stampeders fan too, especially in the 1990s, where we dominated the league so much in the regular season, didn't encounter much adversity, but didn't see adversity till playoff time. This could work against the Montreal Alouettes this year, which kind of was the same thing that happened to the Toronto Argonauts last year. Now obviously this leads to the next thing, Montreal winning the turnover battle. They definitely won that hands down in the East final last year. And then I'm going to say, since Toronto has the edge in special teams, if they can suppress the coverage, especially Janarian Grant, because if he, I'm not going to guarantee it, but I say if Janarian Grant gets Toronto in favorable field position, or even returns a kick return or a punt return for a touchdown, I like Toronto's chances to go to Vancouver for the Grey Cup. Then I'll mention Toronto win. Well, if Chad Kelly looked like himself last week to this week, he looked unstoppable. So which Chad Kelly will show up? Last week's Chad Kelly in the East semifinal and the MLP that he had last season, or the Chad Kelly that was in the East final last year. At least this time the scene's in Montreal as opposed to Toronto. And then I'm going to say, if the defensive line pressures the Montreal's offense, if they can put a stop to their running attack for Toronto. And then I'm going to say, I could bleed into if they get big game returns from Janarian Grant, either favorable field position, shorter fields for the offense, or Janarian Grant wins, gets play of the game with a punt return for a touchdown. So the next part, weather forecast. Looks like weather will not be a factor in this game. Since the game's outside, we gotta take a look at it, and we're outside. It's November in Canada. Well, even here in Calgary, it's been fairly nice. Well, it looks like it's going to be fairly nice in Montreal, as they're forecasting a high of sunny and 7 degrees in Montreal. And then they're saying clear and 1 degree for a low. So weather will not be a factor. Fans would take this any day of the week. And oh yeah, the game is actually sold out. So we're going to have a full Percival Molson Stadium to watch this East final. So now let's get to the prediction parts of the video. And this is where these smart bulbs come to play. This is the trim for the division. That's why it's blue and white. And then I'll give my confidence in this pick. So let's bring up the lights again. As this time, if I think the Montreal Alouettes are going to win, we'll have these colors. And they look pretty. Purple and some red. If I think Montreal's going to win, this will be the background. However, if I think the Toronto Argonauts are going to win, got some double blue, dark and light blue, if you can make it out. So who do I think is going to win the East Final to go to the Grey Cup? Montreal or Toronto? Montreal or Toronto? Just gotta go back and forth on this. I mean, looking at the season series, how these teams match up, history-wise, I think it could be a tough decision. Let me just ponder it a little more. Well, I'm going to say the Toronto Argonauts will be Vancouver bound. I think Toronto is going to win this one. I give a prediction of 30-27. I'm anticipating a very, very close matchup. I'll be surprised if it's a ball all the way, but given Montreal's strength and Toronto, they seem to have that it factor, and the fact that Toronto was on the road, Montreal's been better at home, I'm only going to give this one 50% confidence. So I could still see this go either way because I only have it by 3 points. So I think the Toronto Argonauts will actually advance to the Grey Cup. The Toronto Argonauts showed a lot last week and how they won against the Ottawa RedBlacks. I think the future's still bright for the Ottawa RedBlacks, considering that was their first trip to their playoffs, I meant to say, since 2018. But I think, there's going to be some revenge, I think. So that's another factor that I'm going to give this one to the Toronto Argonauts. So, in a separate video, I'll be previewing the West Final, which will have another classic prairie battle with the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, as the Saskatchewan Roughriders did defeat the BC Lions last week, and Winnipeg was waiting for either Saskatchewan or BC. I guess it's also fitting that Saskatchewan and Winnipeg have to face off against each other, and like the game tennis-wise, Montreal, in terms of tickets sold, that game is also sold out, so it's good to see full buildings for the playoffs. So to close out for this video, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I have my other social links down in the description below. What do you think from the East? We'll be going to Vancouver for the Grey Cup, the 111th Grey Cup. Do you agree with me that the Toronto Argonauts will be Grey Cup bound, or do you think the Montreal Alouettes, on the strength of their dominance all season, will be going to the Grey Cup for a second straight year, looking to repeat, as Montreal did successfully repeat in 2009 and 2010 when the games were played here in Alberta. So I'm going to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, or see me in the West Final preview between who I think is going to win between the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So I'll see you there.